Mr. Speaker, it's an odd feeling for me in this House to stand and say that I have to support something that Sir Roger Douglas said, because he was rating this bill and he rated it 2 or 3 out of 100. No, it was out of 100. No. Louise Upson's trying to rewrite history over there on the other side of the House. That was what she wanted, but what Sir Roger Douglas said was 2 or 3 out of 100, because he recognised, as other speakers have, from the Labour Party, from the Green Party and from the Māori Party, that this bill lacks ambition. You know, once upon a time, the National Party said they were ambitious for New Zealand. But this bill does very, very little to be ambitious for New Zealand. It does very little to actually say education's important. We think it's one of the most important things to unlocking the future potential of New Zealand. And instead, once again, the National Party come to this House with a technical bill that does very little. Louise Upson was complaining about bureaucracy earlier on. That's the main achievement in this bill, is creating a bit more bureaucracy around the secondary tertiary partnership. That's the achievement in this bill. This bill doesn't give us a vision for the future of education, and that's because the education policy of this government is hopelessly bogged down in national standards, hopelessly bogged down in a policy that has been seen recently by principals in Auckland as flawed, that was not given a proper process, that parents weren't able to contribute to early on. Talked to plenty of parents, Louise Upson, all around my electorate, and they are concerned that the National Party has become so focused on national standards, so focused on coming up and meeting this election promise that they made, that they've lost the plot when it comes to quality education. They've lost the plot when it comes to actually making sure that schools are there, creating the environment that young people can thrive in. And I'm sorry to say that this minister has lost the plot on national standards. Today we discover that the Parliamentary Library, who put out a good information paper on national standards, Mrs. Tolley doesn't like it. It's been pulled. It's been pulled from the... That's right. It's been taken down from the Parliamentary Library website because Mrs. Tolley didn't like it. That's censorship, Mr. Speaker. That's what that is. That's unacceptable behaviour, I believe, from the minister. But it just shows how bogged down this government is when it comes to education. Totally bogged down in a flawed policy of national standards that they can't implement properly. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what we're left with from this government, is a bill that is largely technical. As we've already said, the Labour Party will be supporting it to select committee. We have some misgivings about several areas, and Mr Mallard and Kelvin Davis have outlined those. But we recognise the importance of putting this to the committee so that we can sort that out. Around the question of the secondary tertiary interface, in principle, this is fine. It's important that we do support people to be able to find their way through those later years of secondary education when the environment they're in may not be appropriate for them. And obviously, in Labour and government had the Schools Plus policy that was designed to exactly work on the issues that are being raised in here, to ensure that we are actually managing people's transition through secondary school and into training and on into work perhaps, and ensuring that they have the support to do that. But, Mr. Speaker, it's all very well to have a well-organised situation for those people. But in the end, if the money's not there, if the funding's not there, if the real support for these programs isn't there, then it's not going to work. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing from the national government. We've seen funding cut for literacy programs and numeracy programs. Gateway funding's been frozen. It's stagnant. And as a result, with cost increases that will be being faced there, that's effectively a cut in Gateway, and there'll be fewer places available for people in that program. Youth training funding cut by over $3 million this year. The Youth Guarantee Scheme, we've got considerable doubts on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, if that's really working, if that's actually getting students into training, and the jury is certainly still out on that. The $2.5 million Skill Enhancements Program, that's been ceased. That was a program that was providing a pathway for Māori and Pasifika students to gain qualifications at Level 3. $2.8 million in grants for at-risk youth, cut. So it's all very well to set up, as this bill does, a process for managing the secondary tertiary interface. But if there isn't funding for those programs, if those programs aren't being supported properly, what's the point? There is no point in this. And in fact, I also pick up the comment that Kelvin Davis made earlier, that we need to continue to focus on the quality of schools. We can't just assume that if someone's not succeeding at school, we'll create this program and away they go. We need to make sure that schools are being supported to deal with students who are difficult, who are struggling. And yes, from time to time, they will need to move into these kinds of programs. But what we really want to see is the schools being supported to provide that quality environment and ensure that the students succeed who are there. So obviously around the secondary tertiary interface we can see some of the value here. My colleague Mr Mallard has suggested that perhaps really this is just unnecessary bureaucracy. Does there really need to be this arrangement? Couldn't it be done through policy changes? That's something that the Select Committee will be able to look at. But in general and in principle we do support the notion of supporting people through these kinds of programs, but we would like to make sure that the National Government understands the importance of having secondary schools delivering quality programs and ensuring that they meet the needs of students and that they move into these programs only when that is necessary and perhaps not being done. A couple of the other elements that people have raised here are around the question of the limited access programs. These are limited attendance centres, sorry. The limited attendance centre question is one, as Mr Mallard has raised, it does need to be clarified when the bill goes to committee. We've had an assurance from the Minister today that the concerns Mr Mallard raised were not intended, and that's good, but we'll need to make sure that the wording of the bill picks that up. However, I share the concerns of Catherine Delahunty on this particular point about the direction that this is showing, the direction away from the quality agenda in early childhood education. And Mr Horawira was quite critical of Mr Mallard as an education minister before. Well, one thing I want to say in this House and put on the record is that there hasn't been an education minister in New Zealand for a very, very long time who paid as much attention to early childhood education as Trevor Mallard. He made sure that early childhood education was respected, was professionalised and resources were put towards it. And New Zealand will be far the better for the work of Mr Mallard in early childhood education in the future, unless we go further down the path that Mrs Tolley wants to go down of taking away from the quality agenda. And while this particular provision probably is okay with that clarification, more and more what we're seeing in early childhood education is that the National Government do not see it as an important part, an important first step in education, in quality education, but rather as some form of child minding. That is not a direction that we should be going in. We should be continuing the path that Mr Mallard went down with early childhood education. A number of other speakers have also referred to the question of the enrolment schemes and the proposed additional criteria there. I do have concerns about this, Mr Speaker. This is a difficult area for a lot of parents. People obviously want their children to go to good quality schools. We all want that, and we all want them to be able to go to good quality local schools, and that should always be the focus, to make sure that excellent schools are available for everybody. Now, the additional enrolment priorities that have been put in here do start to skew the playing field. Adding the children of former students as the fourth priority, making children of board employees the fifth priority. This is starting to push us again into this sense of some kind of sense of entitlement that perhaps may be based on something incredibly historical, people who haven't lived in an area for a long time. It also, as Mr Mallard says, opens up the potential for loopholes in terms of the children of boards of trustees, people being appointed to boards for very short periods of time. So I don't think, Mr Speaker, that particular clause is designed to sort of undermine enrolment schemes, but it certainly doesn't help, and it certainly doesn't go in a direction that I think is positive. Just briefly in the time remaining to me, I want to refer, and I know my colleague David Shearer will refer more to this, to the change around international students and private training establishments being able to recoup some more money. I've got two concerns here, and again it's a directional concern. Stephen Joyce came to the Select Committee to talk about vote tertiary education last week, and during that appearance he started to talk about trying to rebalance funding more in the direction of private training establishments. I think our priority has got to be our public education system. Private training establishments do have a role in our tertiary education system, but I think we've got to prioritise public institutions, and I am concerned again about a general direction because public institutions are available for everyone, Mr Williamson, that's why, and because that's what we've invested in over generations in making those public institutions good, and private tertiary establishments have a role, but they do not need to be prioritised, and that's what I think perhaps we are seeing in this direction of this bill. So overall, Mr Speaker, I do think this bill has some technical changes that we can support. support. We do have concerns about it, but it simply is not ambitious for New Zealand, as the National Party would like us to believe they are. It in fact does not take education anywhere and continues Mrs Tolley's unfortunate path of being bogged down in national standards instead of focused on quality education for all New Zealanders.